Well, this session is called Misogyny, Accept, Change and Trust. We have an incredible panel and we'll be taking your questions throughout as well. So get those in as you listen to what is said or response to the film you've just seen. We're going to be speaking with Justina Simpson, the ITV journalist, also Catherine Billing, National Fire Chief Council Lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Belinda Goodwin will be with us, Women in Policing Group, National Board Member, of course, at the Federation. But to start us off, let's get a real steer on what this is all about. Sue Honeywell is the Women in Policing co-lead and, of course, a National Board Member of the Federation as well. Sue.
Thank you. As a serving police officer, I found watching that video difficult and disappointing in equal measures. We cannot get away from the fact that there have been far too many instances of misogyny and sexism involving some members of the police force, fire service and armed forces in recent years. Frustratingly and sadly, this has included a few police officers committing acts of violence and abuse against women, including behaviours towards colleagues. This has a devastating impact on every decent, hard-working police officer out there doing a difficult job in incredibly challenging times. I've spoken to several male colleagues who tell me it's tough being a male police officer at the moment, but they really appreciate the impact this has had on women. It remains our intention to take everyone on this journey as we continue to address misogyny in policing. But by no means is it lost on me how divisive and emotive this subject remains. Both the London Fire Brigade and London's Metropolitan Police have been subject to damning independent reviews, designating them as institutionally misogynist. Never has public trust and confidence in the police been so low. That said, we are seeing a real drive to make significant culture changes, and this is welcomed. There has been an acknowledgement and acceptance that there is an issue. This is a big step forward for policing. Misogyny is no longer a forbidden word within the service. We all need to work together to address the societal issues of misogyny, but more specifically those faced within public services. Last year, I actually ended our Misogyny in Policing conference session by asking this question: is addressing sexism and misogyny in policing possible? I still firmly believe the answer to this is yes, but only if lessons are learned and they're really meaningful lessons. The Police Federation continues to work with forces and chief constables across the country to address discrimination that is taking place on their watch. However, we are still seeing far too many cases of discrimination. So far this year, we have already registered 68 employment civil matters related to sex, harassment, maternity, pregnancy and victimisation. It is clear there are lessons that still need to be learned. The Federation is calling on all chief constables to cease the use of non-disclosure agreements designed to silence victims, conceal unacceptable behaviour and put the reputation of the forces ahead of legitimacy. The Federation sent a Freedom of Information request to all forces last year, seeking a number of NDAs, settlement agreements used in their forces following discrimination cases. 37 of the 43 forces responded. 2 failed to provide a response, and 2 stated it would be too costly to provide that data. Only 1 force out of 43 confirmed they had ceased to use NDAs in relation to cases of discrimination. 1 police force, and this was Durham. Between 2017 and 2022, at least 243 NDAs have been handed out. The Metropolitan Police are disproportionately higher, with 133 in that time frame. However, they do have a higher number of staff, and the 2 other largest forces failed to respond due to cost. The question must be asked: why enforce the silence? Are chief constables trying to sweep cases under the carpet? Is the reputation of the force more important than justice for the victim? The only way we will regain the trust and confidence of the victims and the wider public is to face up to wrongdoing deal with the perpetrators, and implement changes where they are needed. We therefore publicly call on Chief Constables to cease the use of clauses in NDAs, COT3 and settler agreements that seek to silence the victim being able to speak about their experience if they choose to. Let's not be afraid of the negative coverage this may entail. We need to focus and we need to learn. Only then will we be able to move forward. We are the public and public are the police. We need to trust in each other to root out misogyny. Policing and other public services have a really rocky road ahead. We acknowledge this, but doing the right things for victims and getting vetting procedures right will restore the confidence in policing that is needed to take us through this turbulent times. There also needs to be equality of arms for all in these cases, regardless of rank or position, and this will ensure a healthier working environment. I have not spoken to one victim who has come out of an employment tribunal process without being significantly impacted. Let's work together to ensure that taking legal action becomes the exception rather than the norm, and look to address matters at the lowest level possible, where appropriate, at the earliest opportunity. This will ensure the best outcome for all, especially when it comes to cases of sexual harassment and misogyny. Thank you.
Sue, thank you. Let's open this up to our wider panel as well. Sue will continue to join us for that discussion as well. I mean, Belinda, just to get a word on the NDA thing there for a second. We had a meeting last week to discuss this session. I was utterly gobsmacked that this was even legal, NDAs, that you would, not only you've gone through the indignity and trauma and all the uncomfortable challenges of having a case that you need to fight and get out there, but then the indignity of being told, well, don't ever talk about it again.
Yeah.
This is real.
This is real. And it was only really when we started really like looking and focusing, because of the behaviours that we started seeing, that we actually, it was almost like a light bulb moment, that we almost know that forces were utilising it or using it, and it was almost becoming the norm. We can only learn if we know what the issue and what the problems are. Yeah. We can't learn when we don't know what the issues and the problems are. And to go through the discrimination and certainly to go through an employment tribunal, a lot of it breaks officers. It's not the actual behaviour that causes that illness, and it ends up mentally, unwell by the end of it. And then, like you said, by the end, it's not a 5-minute process. And then by the end of it, actually, you cannot speak about your experience. Yeah. It's quite humiliating, and it's wrong. Yeah. Unless the member wants it. If the member wants it, and there's condition or there's a reason behind that, but we've got to be more victim focused around that. It's not for the forces to say this must be put in place. It's for them. It's got to be member led.
Catherine, give us in response to that specifically, where are the fire service on this?
Oh,
we're struggling. There we are. We can hear you now, Catherine. We had a momentary blip then.
No problem. It's probably the network problems in Cornwall. So good morning, everybody. In relation to the acceptance that we have probably an institutionally misogynistic sector and services, there is an absolute acceptance across the National Fire Chiefs Council and across chiefs that we have to address that. In relation to the non-disclosure agreements, we probably had a slightly different take in that we find them quite prohibitive in the context of learning, which is what you talked about. We would, and I had cases recently where, obviously for absolutely all the right reasons, we receive kind of requests from reporters to understand what's happening in the service, and I had to to continue for probably about 3 years to send out my response, which is we're dealing with ongoing investigation, and we do not tolerate inappropriate behaviour, and we'll deal with that in the most reasonable way to protect the reputation and trust that we have within our communities. So I am often delighted when silence is broken, because it then allows us to probably identify the full extent of the issue, which quite often people aren't aware of. So yeah, for me, it's got to be about full disclosure if appropriate. And as you said, the victims in this, whether they're inside the service or whether they're members of our public, they're of course the most important people. But we need, I think, to be really open and honest, and to be clear on how we're going to learn from this.
And Justina, just to widen this out a little bit, when you started in journalism, if somebody had said to you, you know, what are the top 5, top 10 things you'll be reporting on and looking at, you might not have thought that in the 21st century that misogyny in policing would be up there. You know, I think we all, perhaps reasonably, but misplaced, thought that was the 70s, the 80s, maybe a bit of the 90s, but not today. And yet, you can turn on the TV and watch a report on this almost any day of the week at the moment.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you so much for having us here today. And I have to say, this is an absolute breath of fresh air for the Police Federation, bringing this to light and having this open, honest conversation. It was ITV News that has really thrown the issues with the fire service into the spotlight. This started 18 months ago because one very brave cleaner who had worked for 20 years in a fire station was being systematically abused by a firefighter. And it took her every ounce of her soul to finally speak out. And, you know, it's really sad because when you talk about NDAs, I find it quite emotional because I'm currently speaking to 6 women, all of whom want to tell their stories but have been silenced by NDAs. One was paid £40,000 to keep her mouth shut for the fact that she was sexually assaulted by a senior, very high up, third in command of the fire service. Obviously, I'm not going to name names. This is something I'm dealing with day to day, and these women want to speak out. But unfortunately, the experiences that we had with the fire service, they're only interested in protecting their reputation, shiny PR, lovely, you know, examples of the good that they're doing. And it's really, really sad. But going back to what you're saying about would I expect to see this now? When I started in journalism, all the stories I ever did about the fire service were lovely. It was car washes, charity, bonfire night. And it's taken just a few brave women that have come forward to really open the doors further to say, actually, it is still happening in today, 2023. It isn't something that just went on 20 years ago. And it's just so very sad to think that this is still going on. And when I speak to the women and the effect that this is having on them, they're still serving, some have been forced out, some aren't allowed to speak out, and the stories they carry, it's absolutely heartbreaking. So it's just really refreshing to be here today to hear that you are addressing it.
And just on that point, Sue, I mean, there's much more beyond just the NDA issue, but I think it's intriguing because a lot of people would not perhaps have known, as I didn't, that this was even a thing. And presumably they have a legal status, the NDA, because your temptation is to say, well, I'll sign it and then I'll just sing like a canary afterwards. But if you do that, you run the risk of breaking some kind of workplace law, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. NDAs are a legal binding agreement. So you are signing to that contract. And I think the thing that we need to ensure that we're getting across here, because clearly within policing, there's and I'm sure within other services as well, there is a need for confidentiality in relation to some investigations and other work that we do. What we're specifically calling out here today is utilising the clauses in NDAs that are used to silence victims. That can never be acceptable in today's society if we are going to learn from the cases that have gone forward. And hopefully there is going to be this openness that actually if someone wants to talk about their experience, they're free to do so. Notwithstanding the fact that surveys are ongoing at the moment, they are unable to talk about their experience in any way, shape or form. So that is what we're trying to ensure is you know, doesn't happen moving forward.
What is misogyny, Belinda? Because perhaps that's the bone of contention here. There's going to be a lot of officers and not just male officers, a lot of female officers aren't necessarily fully across what it means. Justina there was outlining some pretty horrific cases, but they don't all come in that form, acts of misogyny. There's that they can accumulate, they can be what some people think are subtle, it's banter, it's a workplace, all of these things we're aware of. Give us a kind of an overview of what it really means, that word.
I think it's just culture, and it's that behaviour and language for me. And you know, you touched on that. It doesn't just come. Let's face it. You know, sexual harassment in the workplace, and certainly in our organisation, we've seen mainly being perpetrated by men. But misogyny is a lot wider than that. It's about that language, and women tend or can be misogynistic against other women. Sue and I had done an event in London last week, and one of the questions were, why is it that we see so many, and leadership seems to be a bit of a theme today, so I'll touch on that, but where you see a lot of female leaders within our organisation, a lot of them do not then try and support or promote or mentor the younger officers. They go through that glass ceiling and they say, well, why are you pulling the drawbridge up? And it's almost, and it's that, again, it's that behaviour towards female officers that are going on maternity leave, or they want to go on flexible working or part-time. It's like, oh, they're going on, you know, it's that drawl of, you know, or putting them down, or saying, oh God, you know, I can't afford to lose you if you're going to go part-time and moving off. It's massive, Ian. It's absolutely massive. But for us, women have got a part to play within this culture at the moment. You know, we've got upstanders, we've got bystanders, but we want more women to actually, you know, call out that behaviour. And let's not forget, there are a lot of our male officers that are calling out this behaviour now as well. Hence why we're seeing a lot of complaints coming in, and people, rightly so, being challenged and saying this is inappropriate behaviour by our male colleagues as well. But we've all got a part to play. It's male and female, and it's all of us together calling out the behaviour, the language, and that's really, really important for us.
And it's interesting to go back to that point that I put to Justina about, you know, in today's world, you'd think this was kind of not so much fully dealt with, but mostly dealt with. And it's not as if we don't have quite a lot of high-profile senior female officers. The most senior ranking cop in the country up until recently was a female. You know, there's lots of very visual females in policing, like there wasn't even 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Which leads us to think, well, this must surely be all sorted, and yet it still sits there, Sue, doesn't it? It still bubbles away and has yet to be fully resolved.
Absolutely, and it is amazing to see so many females in executive positions. But we've heard from some executives, and it's a hard, long journey to get there. It's the barriers that you potentially face along that journey. And we have absolutely seen an uplift in female officers being recruited. We are starting to see that balance and that redress. However, we still have a lot more work to do at middle management level, sergeants, you know, inspectors. We really do see, you know, that executive team, but it's the people behind that's going to follow them. And you know, 26 years in the job, I feel I have a responsibility for all the young officers coming through the organisation now to make sure these things are in place. But we have to face the fact that we still have issues with uniform, for example. We've only this year got female-specific trousers, for example, for females. So there's so much work still to do in the arena of you know, women within policing. So there is a lot more work to do. It's getting better, but as I say, we do have a responsibility to call out certainly misogynistic behaviour to ensure the culture is fit for purpose. And then, you know, I think only then will we see true equality in policing. We'll
take some questions in a second. Catherine, just on the wider point then about this as a culture. I don't have the numbers, but I would imagine proportionately there are fewer female firefighters than there are female police officers. Visually that seems, or anecdotally that certainly seems to be the case. Does that therefore lead to a greater problem for you guys in the fire service?
So we're sat nationally around about 10%, a little bit less in Cornwall. I don't necessarily know that it extends to a greater problem. I I think the big thing for me is that if one person is experiencing misogynistic behaviour or inappropriate behaviour and doesn't feel 100% like they're accepted and part of the working environment, then that's one too many. You know, I think it's less about percentages and more about the eradication and the zero tolerance, but also the real understanding around what misogyny is and how it impacts on people. I think the key thing for me is society also, I think, has a part to play in this. You know, we're very conscious that we want our services to be absolutely inclusive so that people can just come to work and get on with the job, not have barriers that are put in their place in any possible way. But we need to recognise that, and I'm sure it's the same in policing, an officer turns up on their first day of training and will absolutely bombard them with, you know, this is how to do your job. These are the processes, the procedures, the legislation, all the stuff that will fundamentally keep them safe and keep the public safe. But then we don't spend enough time on their behaviour and what it truly means to be within a professional organisation where you need to truly be inclusive, value and understand difference in order to do your job as well as you can, but also to be the best member of the team that you can be. Yep. So I think we need to spend more time on supporting our people to be culturally professional as well as operationally professional.
And Justina, and I know this as a journalist, and I'm sure you do too, if you were to get or look for a response from police forces in this case, whether you're contacting a chief constable, whether you're contacting a PCC, whether you're contacting the Home Office, that kind of standard response comes back, doesn't it? We don't accept or tolerate in any shape or form misogyny in the workplace, and we will do all we can to rule it out. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've just verbatim cited the last time somebody responded in that way.
I think I wrote that, actually.
And yet here we are again discussing it, and every time you put the question in to the chiefs, to the bosses, to the leaders, and that same response comes back.
Exactly, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there, and we're going through it actually today. We've got one chief who won't speak to us, and they're going to use their independent crew to do the interview because they will not face our questioning, even though they should be held to account. They will not. We've had to basically turn up outside chiefs' houses, at the gym, because they have a duty of responsibility to answer the public. And also what I find is so from a comms point of view, disturbing is that I think there was only one chief that actually apologised to the victims. They were so keen to jump forward and protect the brand and the image, and there's nothing to see here. Do you have a problem with women? No, we do not. Rather than saying, actually, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'm really concerned. What can we do? They're sort of like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And we're going through it as we speak today. It's just not a good look, and it's not what the public want to see. And also, I think from a whistleblower's point of view, this sort of rock solid, these standard quotes that they come out with on a press release, it really hurts the whistleblowers, and it makes them realise, gosh, if we can't even get them to be held to account, what chance do they have? So, yeah, it's absolutely spot on what you're saying.
Let's do some questions here. This one comes from Paul. It says, can the Federation not consider anonymising the details of a case of misogyny, but still allow the story to be told? Belinda, is that I mean, I can understand the spirit of the question, but there's a few bear traps in that, aren't there, in the sense of you might, by definition, end up identifying somebody, I guess. Yeah,
the protection of, you know, obviously our members and people coming forward, it's got to be paramount, and that comes with trust and confidence. You know, we've worked really hard, and Sue will touch on it, with regards to our internal processes, etc., going forwards, because predominantly we've been seen as PFEW, you're only there for the wrongdoer, and that has to change, and we have definitely addressed that. we've worked really, really hard to address that. So to actually, I do get the spirit, like you said, of the question, but we've got to be really, really protective and be, you know, look after that person that's come forward.
I mean, that's a good point from the Federation perspective. That is the perception, and understandably so, maybe, Sue. You know, you're there to, you know, if somebody has been told they're accused of something, then the Federation will step in and offer whatever legal support can be there. But it can do much more than that.
Absolutely, and Belinda did mention the issue in relation to that perception that we as PFEW only support the perpetrator and don't support the victim is absolutely wrong, but that's our issue, that we need to ensure we're able to promote the fact that actually the work that we have done will continue to promote over the next 12 months is to ensure that all of our members know that we are here as a federation to support them. Last year, we developed a sexual harassment toolkit, which was distributed to all of our federation branch boards up and down the country. So all 43 branch boards who were asked to put in, you know, policies with their forces, with their anti-corruption units, with their professional standards department, to ensure that we're working together. Because quite often, a victim might come forward and they might whistleblow, but actually they're being told to go and get help from the Federation. But we want professional standards departments and our anti-corruption actually to be pointing and referring our members into us and into trained reps within Police Federation. We have equality trained reps up and down the country that are likely to be referred to as Federation support teams. So we want every force across the country to know who their equality trained reps are. And we'll be certainly going out and promoting a lot of our work. We'll be doing some training with the professional standards and our anti-corruption units, because we need to work together. Nobody wants, you know, cops in the organisation that aren't, you know, or should never be police officers. But we've got to remember that the majority of police officers are really decent, hard-working officers. And the reason we are potentially seeing this increase is the amount of people that are coming forward to support victims, you know, reporting these cases. And we need to be there as a federation.
And even though it's not perfect, people are more inclined today than ever before to come forward. I mean, it's still work in progress there.
I think they are, but I actually do think there is still a culture that is slightly frightened to speak out. Because you don't change a culture overnight. It takes time, and I think the fact that we're continuing these conversations is showing that we're stepping in the right direction. But I do think it's going to take time to change that culture, because we're seeing that in society. You know, we've come incredibly, you know, further forward. The fact that we're able to sit and have these conversations, but it's going to take time.
Here's a question. Speaking out when you see or hear something inappropriate can be difficult. What advice and support would you give to colleagues who want to take that step? Can I just ask you, Catherine, from a fire service perspective, I'm sure that question has been asked, you know, where do I go? What am I meant to do? You know, how do I not cause a fuss? How do I not somehow get myself accused of being a troublemaker? All of these issues that are very real when somebody does see something that they want to either progress with or report.
It's really hard because and we've had these conversations across our whole workforce recently, and people say exactly that. I don't, you know, I'm afraid of the stigma, the retribution, and I always personally say, you know, I didn't exactly get where I am today without speaking up and challenging. And what's very interesting is the feedback that we're getting back is it's not the senior team or senior managers that people are afraid of. It's the stigma of being across peers, actually, of, oh, you're the one that spoke up. And that's the hard bit. So what we're trying to say is that, you know, look, a lot of the cases you hear about are the ones that have got to dismissal, that have got to, you know, that real, that kind of real action phase, that real kind of very public phase. And what we said is that the best thing you can do is to challenge, because that is the best thing you can do, is just say, and it doesn't have to be a big, massive, we've just said, just take somebody to one side and say, do you understand how that's made me feel? And as Sue has said, the majority of people are really decent people. And if you actually take somebody to one side and say, you know, are you aware about how you made me feel? The person will probably be mortified and say, I've just never thought about it like that before.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to get people to say, look, you know, you're not, obviously, if it's deep-seated and it's part of who you are, and you know you're one of those people that's going to continue to be a perpetrator, of course it's got to come out, of course it's got to be dealt with. But for the majority of decent people that just haven't thought about what they're saying or what they're doing, it just needs to be nipped in the bud, and that's so important to give our people the confidence to do that. But I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy, because it's not.
And Justina, I mean, you mentioned I mean, it's not easy for the victims to come forward. You just mentioned a case that obviously we can't pursue too much because it's ongoing, but where a victim of what sounded like sexual assault or abuse in some form had spent a long period of time without saying anything. So if victims struggle to come forward, you can see why other people might sometimes. I mean, often you think, well, the other person is maybe the better place sometimes, but that's not always the case. And sometimes that evidence or what you've seen or what you've heard might not, you're not quite sure of it, you don't want to be a troublemaker. There's all of these kind of issues perhaps that stand in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. And certainly with the lovely lady Shirley, the cleaner, who opened up this whole floodgate, you know, you're talking 20 years here of abuse. And she just thought no one would believe her because she was a cleaner. And what's been really important for us at ITV is that these people who've been so brave, they came to us because they didn't feel that they were going to be heard by their own organisations. And she's now like a different woman because she feels empowered that she's actually spoken out, and that's now encouraged other women. And so they've all like joined a little group, and they're very, you know, they've become friends and they've supported each other. But it isn't easy, and I think it is totally about how will you be perceived by the peers, the people, you know, the boots on the ground that you may rely on when you go on a shout, right up to who is in charge of your promotion process. We've had situations where someone really high up, who is now in a very senior position, was sexually harassed by the person running her promotion process. So it works right across all different roles, and it's a really difficult thing to finally speak out, and it takes a lot of courage. But hopefully now, if we all work together, and from the coverage that we've given, that people realise that if they do speak out, they will be listened to, and that's essentially what we want to happen.
Here's a question from Robert Lewis, who says, we are rightly challenging and proactively dealing with misogyny. However, there is never a mention of misandry that occurs on a daily basis. What is being done to address the imbalance we're now experiencing, Sue?
Do you know what, it's a fair point. When we go out as lead of the Women's Network, we also work very closely with the Men's Health Network as well. But it's really important to understand how this impacts on males, and actually they are feeling at the moment slightly under attack as well, because there has been such a high profile of addressing misogyny. But it's absolutely right that there is a hatred towards some men, you know, and it's quite right that these are addressed. However, it's not a society issue, is in the fact that we have evidence to show that they've been disadvantaged within the police service, for example. Like our figures show us
there's
that
no real backstory.
There's no real
not
backstory.
to underplay it,
but actually, and it's not a case of underplaying it, because actually it's not just women who can be sexually harassed, it can also be men. So this isn't just a women issue, but when we're talking about misogyny, we're talking about this issue because it's predominantly affected women within policing. But that is not saying that that issue does not exist and impact on men, and we have to support men to come forward and speak out in exactly the same way. The only thing I highlight is that you know, we would fully support that, but the evidence hasn't come forward to say that actually overall that there's disproportion of, you know, male to female at senior leadership levels, and the barriers that perhaps they haven't faced. But actually any treatment that discriminates against anybody, whether you're male or female, is completely unacceptable on any level. So discrimination is not acceptable, and actually probably we should be talking about it. And you know, it'll be really interesting to have a session next year to find out, you know, the impact of moving this subject forward has had, you know, that impact on how our male colleagues feel, because it's absolutely important that we bring everybody with us on this journey.
And what about the thing about language? You know, I'm always reminded of the word darling which can, I mean, it depends how that word is placed. I was in hospital a couple of years ago, and the nurse attending me, everything was darling this, darling that, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. It felt so nice and cosy and comfortable. But of course, in the workplace, that can take on, now, women can call men darling, men can call women darling, but it can, the context of that, and the reason I mention that is because often it is words that are the root of perhaps a wider problem.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we do there? Is there a list of banned words? How do we police this?
Exactly. You know, and when we, a few years ago, when we started working, looking at sexual harassment in the workplace, certainly with the MPCC back then, that was a question. They were like, well, is there a list, or what is banter? What goes beyond banter? And it's really, really difficult. From my background, I call everyone babe or darling, or, you know, and I have to be really conscious of that sometimes. And I think, who am I saying it to? And sometimes it depends on who's saying it to you. Because, you know, we've all got limits and boundaries. So it might be all...
You kind of know, though, don't you? You know, if someone goes, hello, love, that's a whole different thing from saying hello. That's a whole... I don't know where that came from.
No idea.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely that. Because what we do not want, and we've said this before, isn't it? We don't want robots that are frightened to communicate or on a level where people understand, accept. It has to be about the environment that you're in. As a professional organisation, we should absolutely be professional. But is there language and words? I mean, I'm from Cornwall as well, so, you know, we also have endearing phrases from there. We wouldn't want to stop anything. It's about someone feeling intimidated. It's that hostile environment.
Yeah.
It's the tone of the messages that are being given. So I think we have to be conscious of what we're saying, but actually by no means would we want to dictate what you should be able to say and what you shouldn't. It has to be a little bit of education, common sense, and you know, and calling out that behaviour.
It's common sense, isn't it?
Yeah, if someone called you darling and you felt uncomfortable, then you should feel comfortable to challenge that.
Swearing in the workplace, there's another one, isn't there? I mean, show me a workplace where there isn't. I work in a newsroom, Justina works in a newsroom. It can be a salty experience, but that's, in many respects, a very different point. But it could be a point where somebody feels that, you know, certain language is, you know, tipping over a line, etc.
It's almost like being taken, like, what offends you?
Yeah.
You know, we're in a world now where, and someone said to me, oh, someone's always offended, you know, in any sort of environment now, and it's almost that. It's almost trying to draw it back, bring it back, and see, well, what was the connotation there, or what was the need there? You know, if you've got a chief officer calling you darling, or, you know, I would suggest that's really unprofessional.
Yeah, definitely.
But, you know, on the outside world, or if you're in a, depends what environment you're in. If you're, you know, on a drink stew or something like that.
Yeah. Here's a question from Nikki, who says, what is the Police Federation doing to support the victims of bullying and harassment? I mean, we sort of touched on the role the Federation has in representing, understandably and rightly so, those that have been accused of something. What about victims?
I think that's absolutely right. Part of our toolkit that we've put together is actually a booklet explaining all of the information on all of the issues that are there for our Fed reps, so that uplift of training of Fed reps. But bullying in the workplace is absolutely unacceptable, and I think the fact that we are being open to the fact, come to us. If you experience bullying within the workplace, come to the Federation and we will support you. We have specifically trained reps who have been trained on bullying, intimidation, or any forms of discrimination, and will be able to support you if it's appropriate to raise with your line manager or raise a grievance. We actually have support mechanisms in place. So it's about us ensuring that we're able to support our members, and we've definitely uplifted our training for our Federation reps in regards to this.
And a question from Nikki, which applies really across the kind of services. Nikki says, do you think there are areas where the Police Federation and the Fire Service could work together to support a better victim process to achieve a better approach for our hard-working emergency workers, like training, retention, recruitment, etc.? I mean, Catherine, that sounds like a no-brainer, I think, to many people, right?
No, definitely. Just to pick up one of the points around language, for me, it's about intent. So, you know, So if your intent is to cause that harm, then obviously you can say it in any way, can't you?
Yeah.
But it's about the intent and also how people felt through that language. Yes, that's something that we not only look to do across, so the National Fire Chiefs Council is all about the joint learning, and is there anything we can do to support each other to kind of improve that kind of sector-led improvement, but absolutely across forces and services, because I've been doing some work with Devon and Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly Police, because again, you know, is some of what we're experiencing a little bit more cultural to potentially kind of Cornwall, you know, because obviously our demographic's very different to London, so our makeup and understanding and our cultural development is going to be different to probably diversity and understanding in the likes of London and the metropolitan. So yeah, it's like you said, it's an absolute no-brainer around that learning and how can we train together and possibly do some leadership development together as well.
And Belinda, you support that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've worked with Fire Service and Unison and, you know, many other stakeholders developing the menopause guidance that we did, that there's another survey coming out this year looking at seeing how that's been embedded within, certainly around forces, but we're more than welcome working with other stakeholders. I think it's a societal issue.
Yeah.
You know, it's about talking to our kids as they're growing up and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, but working together as emergency services to actually draw it out and say, actually, collectively, you know, your issues are our issues, and it's very, very similar. It's a macho environment that a lot of us are working within policing and certainly fire. Yeah. And it's only right and proper that we do pull that together. I think we get a better response by doing that.
And Justina, just a final question from a journalistic perspective. We began this session by talking about how, you know, who would have thought in the 21st century at this point in the human journey there'd be so many stories to report on. What is that inbox of yours looking like right now in this respect when it comes to this issue of misogyny?
Full. It's full. And again, I have to go back to NDAs, these poor women that want to speak out, and they're this close, but obviously at ITV, it's a legally binding document, like you said, and we desperately want to tell their story. But at the same time, they have been told, you know, shut up, basically, take the money and go. And some of them have been so distraught by what's happened that they can't speak out. We've got others who want to speak that are too scared. So I've got a group of people at the moment emailing me from one service, there's about 6 of them, and they're too scared to speak on the phone. So they've got an emailer group that they email us, because they're worried about the implications of their career and the bit of the pension and what it means. They've got families. And also, what I will say, this isn't just women coming to us. There are some absolutely awesome firefighters on the ground right the way up, and they don't want their service to be in the spotlight like it is. They want it to change. So it's not the majority, but unfortunately, this minority within both police and fire are absolutely tarnishing the reputation, and I think it's down to everyone to expose it, to address it, and to change it. And, you know, from ITV's perspective, what we would really like to do, maybe we can go to Cornwall, but to have a real look at a service, on an honest look, you know, what are the facilities like for women there when they get changed? What, you know, have a woman, because a lot of the time if we're invited in, they've almost been microchipped. Yes, it's a wonderful service. I love my colleagues, and you know that there's, you know, let's be truthful about it and move forward, and also celebrate some of the fantastic work police and fire do.
Listen, Justina, thank you for your time. Thank you to all of our panel. We do hit the clock on this. Justina Simpson, ITV journalist. Thank you to Catherine Billing as well, National Fire Chief Council lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Catherine, thank you to him. You, Belinda, thank you too, as ever. Sue as well, thank you. And we will see you both over the course of the next day or so.